Neville Goddard's 10 Quotes Understood by David Rousseau. Introduction. Understanding the Power of Imagination. In the 20th century, a mystic and lecturer named Neville Goddard shared a message that challenged the way many people think about reality. His teachings centered on one powerful idea. Imagination is not merely a mental activity or a form of fantasy. It is the creative force behind the experiences we encounter in life. Most people are taught to see imagination as something separate from the real world. It is often associated with daydreaming, storytelling, or creative hobbies. According to Neville, however, imagination plays a far more significant role. He believed that every external event first begins as an inner experience in the mind. Before a building is constructed, someone imagines it. Before a song is written, a melody appears in the mind of a musician. Before a life changes direction, the possibility of that change usually appears as a thought, an image, or a feeling within a person. Neville extended this simple observation into a much deeper principle. He taught that the inner world of thoughts, assumptions, and feelings gradually shapes the outer world of circumstances. The ideas we repeatedly imagine and emotionally accept tend to influence the direction our lives take. This perspective places imagination at the center of personal experience. Instead of seeing life as something that simply happens to us, Neville suggested that we are constantly participating in its creation through our inner states. The way we imagine ourselves, the feelings we entertain, and the assumptions we hold about life quietly influence how events unfold around us. Throughout his lectures and books, Neville expressed these ideas through short, memorable statements. Many of these quotes are simple enough to repeat in a sentence, yet they contain layers of meaning that are not always immediately obvious. For example, phrases like "assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled" or "live in the end" may sound poetic at first, but they also describe a very specific way of thinking and feeling about life. Understanding these ideas requires more than memorizing the words. It requires exploring what they mean in practice. This audiobook examines 10 of Neville Goddard's most well-known quotes and explores the ideas behind them. Each chapter focuses on one statement and looks at what it means, why Neville considered it important, and how it can be applied in everyday life. The purpose is not to present these teachings as rigid rules or unquestionable truths. Instead, the goal is to understand the principles Neville was pointing toward and to see how they might relate to our own experiences. Many people who encounter Neville's teachings notice something interesting. The ideas often encourage a new way of observing thoughts and emotions. Instead of treating imagination as something trivial, they begin to recognize it as a powerful part of human consciousness. When we become aware of how our inner conversations, beliefs, and feelings influence our behavior and expectations, we may start to see our lives from a different perspective. Neville often encouraged people to test these ideas for themselves, rather than accepting them blindly. He suggested experimenting with imagination deliberately, imagining positive outcomes, assuming success, and noticing how these interchanges affect one's outlook and actions. Whether someone approaches these teachings from a spiritual, philosophical, or psychological viewpoint, they offer an intriguing possibility that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what is possible may shape far more of our experience than we usually realize. As we explore the following chapters and the quotes behind them, the aim is simple: to move beyond repeating the words and begin to understand their meaning, because once the ideas behind these statements become clear, imagination may no longer seem like a small or insignificant part of life. It may begin to look like one of the most powerful forces we possess. Chapter 1. Imagination Creates Reality. One of the most central ideas taught by Neville Goddard is contained in a short but powerful statement: imagination creates reality. At first, this idea can sound exaggerated or even impossible. Most people grow up believing that reality exists first and that imagination simply reacts to it. In that common view, imagination is something we use to escape reality, to entertain ourselves, or to think about things that may never happen. Neville presented a very different perspective. He suggested that imagination is not merely a reflection of the world around us. Instead, it is the starting point from which the world is eventually formed. In other words, before something appears in physical experience. It first exists as an inner image, thought, or feeling. To understand this idea more clearly, it helps to look at everyday examples. Every object created by human beings began in someone's mind. A house was imagined by an architect before it was built. A new technology was envisioned by an inventor before it became real. Even a simple conversation often begins as a thought before it is spoken aloud. In these cases, imagination clearly precedes physical reality. Neville believed that the same principle applies, not only to inventions and creative projects, but also to the events and conditions that shape our personal lives. According to his teachings, the thoughts we consistently entertain and the situations we repeatedly imagine begin to influence our expectations, decisions, and actions. Over time, these inner patterns tend to shape our experiences in the outer world. This does not mean that every passing thought instantly becomes real. Human minds produce thousands of thoughts every day, many of which disappear as quickly as they appear. Neville emphasized something more specific: the ideas that carry emotional intensity and are repeatedly imagined. When a person frequently imagines a certain outcome, especially when that imagination is combined with strong feeling, the mind begins to treat that idea as familiar and believable. Gradually, this inner familiarity can influence how the person behaves, what opportunities they notice, and how they respond to challenges. For example, someone who consistently imagines themselves succeeding may begin to approach opportunities with confidence. They may speak differently, take chances they would normally avoid, and persist longer when facing difficulties. On the other hand, someone who repeatedly imagines failure may unconsciously reinforce doubt and hesitation, which can limit their actions and outcomes. In both cases, imagination influences behavior and behavior influences results. From Neville's point of view, imagination is not idle daydreaming. It is an active creative force operating within consciousness. Every time we imagine ourselves in a particular role, situation, or identity, we are rehearsing a version of reality within the mind. Over time, these inner rehearsals can shape the direction of our lives. This idea also changes how we think about possibility. If imagination truly plays a creative role in shaping experience, then it becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a tool for consciously exploring new outcomes. Instead of only reacting to circumstances, a person can begin to imagine different possibilities for the future. They might imagine themselves becoming more confident, building stronger relationships, achieving a long-desired goal, or living in a way that reflects their deeper aspirations. According to Neville, when these imagined experiences are repeated with feeling and conviction, they begin to influence the individual's inner state. And when the inner state changes, the outer experience often begins to shift as well. Of course, this does not mean life becomes instantly controllable or predictable. External factors, other people, and unexpected events still play their roles in the unfolding of life. Neville's teaching simply suggests that imagination plays a much larger role than most people realize. Instead of being a passive observer of life, each person is constantly shaping their experience through the images and feelings they entertain within themselves. Understanding the statement, "Imagination creates reality," therefore begins with recognizing the importance of the inner world. Our thoughts matter, our feelings matter, and the scenes we repeatedly imagine may quietly influence the life we eventually live. For Neville, learning to guide the imagination deliberately was one of the most important skills a person could develop, because once we realize that imagination is creative, we begin to ask a new question. If imagination is shaping my experience, what kind of reality am I imagining? Chapter 2. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Among the many teachings shared by Neville Goddard, one phrase appears again and again in his lectures and writings: assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. At first glance, this statement may sound simple, yet it describes one of the most important principles in Neville's philosophy of imagination. Many people approach their desires in a very common way. They think about what they want while simultaneously feeling that they do not have it. A person might say, "I want a better job," while feeling frustrated about their current situation. Someone might wish for financial security while feeling worried about money. Another person may desire a loving relationship while feeling lonely or doubtful. In these situations, the mind is focused on the desire, but the emotional state is focused on the absence of it. According to Neville, this emotional contradiction keeps the desired outcome feeling distant. Instead of imagining from the perspective of already having what they want, many people imagine from the perspective of wanting it. The mind stays fixed on the gap between the present situation and the desired one. Neville suggested a different approach. Rather than imagining the process of getting something, he encouraged people to imagine the moment after the desire has already been fulfilled. This shift may seem subtle, but it changes the entire perspective of the imagination. For example, imagine someone who desires a new career opportunity. Instead of picturing the long process of applications, interviews, and waiting for responses, Neville would suggest imagining the moment when the goal has already been achieved. Perhaps the person imagines receiving the message confirming the job offer. They might imagine telling a friend the good news, or feeling the relief and excitement of knowing the opportunity is theirs. The important part of this exercise is not just the image, it is the feeling associated with it. Neville believed that feeling is what impresses the subconscious mind. When a person repeatedly enters the emotional state of the wish already fulfilled, the mind begins to accept that state as natural. Over time, this inner acceptance can change how the person sees themselves and their circumstances. Someone who repeatedly feels the relief of financial security may begin to behave with more calm and confidence around money. Someone who imagines the joy of a successful relationship may begin to carry themselves differently in social situations. The inner experience gradually shapes the outer behavior. Neville also emphasized that imagination works best when it is vivid but simple. Instead of creating complicated mental stories, he often suggested imagining a short scene that clearly implies the wish has already come true. This scene might last only a few seconds in the imagination, but it is repeated until the feeling becomes natural. For example, feeling the handshake that congratulates you on your success, hearing someone say, "I'm so happy for you," seeing yourself comfortably living in a new home. These small imagined moments represent the end result of a desire rather than the struggle of achieving it. By focusing on the emotional reality of the fulfilled wish, a person begins to identify with the version of themselves who already has what they want. This shift in identity is a key part of Neville's teaching. When you consistently feel like the person who already has the desired outcome, your thoughts, expectations, and decisions often begin to align with that identity. Opportunities that once seemed invisible may become more noticeable. Actions that once felt intimidating may begin to feel natural. The inner state quietly influences the outer experience. Neville often recommended practicing this technique during moments when the mind is relaxed, such as before falling asleep. In these quiet states, the imagination tends to become more vivid and the subconscious mind more receptive. However, he also emphasized that the most important factor is consistency. Returning to the feeling of the wish fulfilled again and again gradually builds a new inner assumption. Over time, this assumption begins to feel normal rather than imaginary. Understanding the quote, "assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled" therefore means learning to shift the focus of imagination. Instead of dwelling on desire, we move into the emotional experience of already having what we seek. Instead of imagining the struggle, we imagine the result. And according to Neville, when the feeling of fulfillment becomes natural within us, the outer world often begins to reflect that inner state in ways we may not have expected. The key is not forcing belief or pretending something is true. It is gently returning, again and again, to the emotional reality of the fulfilled wish until the mind begins to accept it as part of who we are. Chapter 3. Feeling is the secret. One of the most important teachings of Neville Goddard is summed up in a deceptively simple statement: feeling is the secret. At first glance, it may seem that thoughts alone are enough to shape reality. After all, we spend much of our lives thinking, planning, and analyzing. But Neville emphasized that thought without feeling lacks creative power. Consider this: a person may say, "I want success," or "I want love." But if those words are not accompanied by genuine feeling, they carry little weight in shaping the subconscious mind. Thoughts that are casual or doubtful do not impress the inner consciousness. In fact, if the feeling contradicts the thought, like saying I am confident, while feeling fear or insecurity. The subconscious tends to accept the feeling as truth rather than the words. Neville taught that emotions act as the fuel for imagination. A thought paired with vivid feeling becomes an inner experience, and these inner experiences are what gradually shape outer reality. For example, imagine two people visualizing a promotion at work. The first person merely thinks about the position, the responsibilities, the title, the salary. They do not connect with any emotion, and their imagination remains detached. The second person imagines receiving the promotion and truly feels the excitement, pride, and satisfaction as if it has already happened. According to Neville, the second person is far more likely to experience circumstances that align with that inner state. Feeling does more than make a mental image more vivid. It tells the subconscious mind what we believe about ourselves and the world. Our emotional state acts as a signal that the subconscious interprets as reality. This is why Neville stressed the importance of observing your feelings. They reveal your true assumptions, which may differ from what you consciously want. A person may verbally affirm abundance but feel scarcity. They may claim to want love but feel unworthy. These conflicting feelings can silently sabotage the conscious desire. The secret, then, is learning to align feeling with intention. Thoughts are like seeds, but feeling provides the water and sunlight. The more consistently a thought is combined with a genuine emotion, the stronger its influence over your inner world and eventually, over your external circumstances. Neville also suggested that the best time to practice this alignment is in quiet, reflective moments, such as just before sleep. In these moments, the mind is relaxed, and feelings can be impressed upon the subconscious more deeply. Ultimately, feeling is the secret teaches a profound truth. What we feel is far more powerful than what we merely think. By cultivating the feelings of the reality we wish to experience, we gradually guide our inner world and, in turn, our outer world toward the life we desire. This understanding shifts the focus from wishful thinking to conscious emotional experience. Instead of relying solely on mental images or intellectual affirmations, we engage the full power of consciousness by combining thought and feeling. Neville's teaching reminds us that our inner emotional life is the architect of our outer reality. By mastering the feelings that accompany our desires, we unlock the secret to shaping experience in a deliberate, creative way. Chapter 4. Live in the End. One of the most repeated instructions in the teachings of Neville Goddard is, live in the end. At first, this advice may seem confusing. How can we live in the end when the desired outcome hasn't yet appeared in our lives? Most people naturally focus on the steps, the obstacles, or the process required to achieve a goal. Neville suggested a different approach. Instead of concentrating on how something will happen, focus on the feeling of the result already being realized. Living in the end means mentally and emotionally placing yourself at the point where your desire is already fulfilled. Imagine a person who wants a new home. Instead of thinking about the mortgage applications, the moving process, or the negotiations, Neville would encourage them to imagine living in that home, walking through the rooms, arranging furniture, feeling at peace, and experiencing the satisfaction of already being there. The key is not creating a detailed how-to plan but inhabiting the reality of the fulfilled desire. This shifts the focus from lack to abundance, from longing to fulfillment. Neville emphasized that the outer world often reflects the inner world. When a person consistently imagines the end state as real, it gradually transforms their inner identity. They stop seeing themselves as someone waiting for change and begin seeing themselves as someone who already possesses the outcome. This subtle shift in self-perception can profoundly influence behavior, choices, and opportunities. For example, a person who imagines themselves already successful in a career begins to carry themselves with confidence, make decisions aligned with that identity, and notice opportunities that align with their imagined success. Conversely, someone focused on the struggle or the steps may remain stuck in the mindset of waiting and lack, inadvertently delaying the manifestation of their goals. Living in the end is not wishful thinking or pretending. It is consciously rehearsing an inner reality until it becomes a natural part of your mental and emotional landscape. It is a method of teaching the subconscious mind what you consider real and true. Neville also highlighted the importance of feeling while imagining the end. Simply picturing a scene without emotional engagement is often insufficient. The subconscious responds to the emotional reality of the imagined state. When the feeling of the end is vivid, the subconscious mind accepts it as already existing, and the outer circumstances begin to align with that inner assumption. This practice also encourages patience. When you live in the end, you are no longer frustrated by the gap between desire and current circumstances. You know your inner reality is set, and the external world gradually conforms. In essence, live in the end teaches that manifestation is less about chasing outcomes and more about becoming the person who already has what they desire. When you shift your inner state, your external world eventually follows. Neville's instruction is simple but profound. Instead of focusing on what is missing, immerse yourself in the feeling of fulfillment. Act, think, and feel as if your desire is already real. Over time, this inner reality shapes your outer reality, often in ways you might never have expected. Chapter 5. An assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. One of the most striking insights from Neville Goddard is his assertion, an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. At first, this may seem counterintuitive. How can something that is not true eventually become reality? Most people assume that truth must precede belief, that circumstances must match desires before any change is possible. Neville flipped this idea on its head. He taught that persistent belief can shape reality, even before external evidence appears. The key word in this quote is persistence. A passing thought or a fleeting hope has little power, but a consistently held assumption repeatedly imagined and emotionally accepted begins to impress the subconscious mind. The mind treats it as real, and over time, this inner conviction influences behavior, choices, and circumstances. Consider historical examples. Inventors, explorers, and pioneers often believed in outcomes long before anyone else did. The Wright brothers imagined human flight while others considered it impossible. Scientists and innovators frequently held assumptions that contradicted current reality, but their persistence eventually shaped the world. Neville argued that this principle works for personal life as well. For instance, someone may assume they are worthy of love, success, or financial abundance, even if present circumstances suggest otherwise. If they persist in that inner assumption, imagining themselves already in that state and feeling it as real, their mindset begins to shift. This inner shift gradually changes their actions, attitudes, and awareness, creating conditions that eventually reflect the assumed reality. Neville's teaching is not about wishful thinking or ignoring reality. It is about deliberately guiding the imagination toward a chosen assumption and maintaining it long enough for it to influence the subconscious mind. The world outside may resist initially, but the inner world, when held persistently, eventually molds the outer world. This principle also highlights the importance of assumptions in daily life. Most people are unknowingly living by assumptions that limit them, beliefs about their abilities, relationships, or circumstances. By identifying these assumptions and deliberately replacing them with empowering ones, individuals can reshape their experiences over time. In practice, this requires focus, repetition, and emotional engagement. The mind tends to reinforce whatever it repeatedly experiences and accepts. By consistently imagining and feeling a desired assumption as real, you teach yourself to inhabit a new reality, even before the outer world shows signs of it. Neville's quote reminds us that reality is not fixed, it is malleable, shaped by the inner assumptions we hold. Persistence is the bridge between imagination and manifestation. Understanding this teaching encourages a shift in perspective. Instead of waiting for circumstances to change, begin by changing the assumption within. With time, consistency, and feeling, the false assumption can indeed harden into fact, reshaping life in ways once thought impossible. Chapter 6. Change your conception of yourself. One of the most practical and transformative teachings of Neville Goddard is, change your conception of yourself. At its core, this statement addresses identity, the way we see ourselves. According to Neville, the beliefs we hold about ourselves shape not only our thoughts and feelings, but also our actions, decisions, and ultimately, the circumstances of our lives. Many people go through life unconsciously accepting a self-concept formed by upbringing, past experiences, and societal influences. Someone may see themselves as unlucky, unworthy, or incapable. Another person may believe they are destined to struggle financially or fail in relationships. These self-perceptions, often unexamined, act as invisible scripts that guide behavior and expectations. Neville taught that the first step to transforming life is to redefine that inner self-image. Instead of being trapped by old labels, we have the power to imagine a new identity and to feel ourselves as that person. The way we see ourselves internally eventually manifests in the external world. For example, if someone habitually thinks, "I am unlucky with money," they may unconsciously make choices that reinforce scarcity, avoiding opportunities, hesitating to invest, or settling for less than they deserve. By contrast, if they adopt the assumption that they are financially capable and deserving, their actions often align with that belief, opening doors that were previously unnoticed. Neville emphasized that this transformation requires persistence and emotional engagement. It is not enough to intellectually declare a new identity. The subconscious mind responds to what is felt as true. By consistently imagining oneself as confident, successful, or worthy, and by feeling the emotions of that imagined self, the mind gradually accepts this new conception as real. This teaching also shows why external change often follows internal change. When a person becomes aware of their new self-concept, they begin to behave differently, notice new opportunities, and attract experiences that match their inner state. In other words, the outer life becomes a reflection of the inner identity. Change your conception of yourself is a call to take responsibility for the inner narrative that guides your life. Instead of accepting limitations imposed by past experiences or societal expectations, Neville encourages deliberate reimagining of the self. Practically, this can be done through mental rehearsal, visualization, and feeling exercises. Imagine yourself as the person you wish to become, acting, speaking, and reacting in ways that reflect that identity. Return to that image repeatedly until it feels natural. Over time, the subconscious mind begins to embody this new version of you, and your external reality follows suit. In essence, Neville's teaching reminds us that transformation begins from within. By changing your conception of yourself, you are not chasing change in the world, you are creating it from the inside out. The question then becomes, what version of yourself are you choosing to embody today? Chapter 7. Dare to believe in the reality of your assumption. Neville Goddard's teaching, Dare to believe in the reality of your assumption, challenges us to embrace bold trust in what is not yet visible. Many people hold back, waiting for external proof of success, love, or abundance before they allow themselves to truly believe. They think, "I'll believe it when I see it." Neville insisted on turning this approach upside down. Belief must come first, even in the absence of tangible evidence. In Neville's framework, an assumption is a mental and emotional stance you adopt as though it is already true. It is an inner reality you inhabit that shapes your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. To dare to believe means to commit fully to this chosen inner reality, even when the outside world seems to contradict it. For instance, someone longing for a loving relationship might feel loneliness or rejection in the present. Following Neville's guidance, they would embody the sense of being already loved and appreciated, daring to accept the truth of that feeling despite current appearances. This courageous inner conviction impresses the subconscious mind and activates the creative process. Neville likened this to stepping into unknown territory. It demands trust in your inner vision and persistence in that trust, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. This is not blind faith, but an intentional imaginative exercise, engaging both emotion and intellect. Fully daring to believe also diminishes doubt and hesitation. When a person truly accepts an assumption as real, their thoughts, emotions, and actions naturally align with it. Opportunities that once went unnoticed become visible, and decisions that felt impossible now seem attainable. In this way, inner belief begins to reshape external reality. Neville highlighted the sacred power of imagination. To dare to believe is to honor that power. claiming responsibility for your creative role in life. By embracing an assumption with conviction, you signal to your subconscious that this is more than a fleeting wish. It is a reality you are ready to inhabit. Practically, this often requires repetition and emotional involvement, returning to the assumed state, repeatedly imagining scenes, feeling the associated emotions, and maintaining inner certainty gradually impresses the subconscious, eventually manifesting in the physical world. This teaching reminds us that waiting for proof is optional. Creation starts within, through the courage to trust the reality of an assumption, and through acting as if it is already true. Neville's guidance invites us to boldly inhabit our imagination, treat the unseen as real, and trust that belief itself can shape our world. Chapter 8. Creation is finished. Neville Goddard's statement, "Creation is finished," carries a profound yet subtle meaning. At first glance, it seems contradictory. How can creation be complete when life is ongoing? Neville's insight is that every possibility already exists in the realm of imagination, and what we perceive as creating is simply choosing and actualizing one of these possibilities. According to Neville, nothing in life truly needs to be invented from scratch. Every experience, outcome, and scenario already exists in consciousness. The material world merely reflects what has been assumed internally. What we call creation is the outward expression of an inner reality. Think of an artist envisioning a painting. The image exists fully in the mind before a brush ever touches the canvas. The act of painting does not create something new. It manifests what already exists internally. Neville extended this to all life experiences. Every goal, desire, or dream is already present as a potential reality in consciousness. This perspective shifts the focus from forcing results to aligning with the reality already present within imagination. Success is less about effort and more about inner alignment. By living, thinking, and feeling as though the desired reality is already complete, the outer world naturally conforms. Creation is finished also highlights the timeless nature of imagination. Within the inner world, there is no past or future. Every possibility exists simultaneously. Our role is to select consciously which reality to inhabit and treat as real. In practice, this teaching encourages people to stop worrying about the how of manifestation, rather than focusing on steps, timing, or obstacles. Neville advised nurturing the inner sense of fulfillment. Once the inner state is firmly established, external circumstances often fall into place naturally. In essence, creation is not something we must manufacture. It already exists in the imagination. Our responsibility is to assume, feel, and align with that completed reality. With consistent practice, the outer world gradually mirrors the inner world, revealing the reality that has always been there at its source. Neville's insight is both liberating and empowering. Everything we desire exists in potential, waiting for us to acknowledge it through imagination and feeling. We do not create from nothing. We step into a pre-existing creation with confidence and awareness. Chapter 9. What you feel yourself to be. You are. One of the most direct and revealing teachings of Neville Goddard is what you feel yourself to be. You are. At its core, this statement emphasizes the power of self-perception and emotional identity. Neville taught that our feelings about ourselves, our inner sense of who we are, play a central role in shaping our experiences. It is not what we wish we were, or what others say about us that matters most, but what we genuinely feel ourselves to be. For many people, life is lived reacting to circumstances or measuring themselves against external standards. They may identify as unsuccessful, unloved, or incapable based on past experiences or social conditioning. These self-feelings, often unconscious, become self-fulfilling prophecies. The mind and body respond in ways that reinforce the inner state, and the outer world mirrors it. Neville's teaching flips this process intentionally. If you consistently feel yourself as confident, capable, and fulfilled, you begin to act, speak, and respond as that person naturally would. The subconscious mind accepts these feelings as reality, and your outer life gradually reflects them. Consider a practical example. Someone who desires a promotion at work may initially feel inadequate or unqualified. If they habitually dwell on these feelings, they may hesitate to take initiative avoid opportunities, or fail to recognize moments to demonstrate their abilities. On the other hand, if they imagine and feel themselves as competent, respected, and already successful, their behavior aligns with this inner state, increasing the likelihood that the promotion manifests. The principle also applies to emotional states like love, happiness, or courage. When someone feels worthy of love, they naturally engage in relationships with openness and confidence. When someone feels brave, they approach challenges with resilience and creativity. In each case, the outer experience follows the inner emotional state. Neville emphasized that this is not about pretending or superficial affirmations. The subconscious mind responds to true, heartfelt feeling, not to words alone. Repetition and emotional consistency are key. The more frequently you feel yourself as the person you wish to be, the more fully it becomes a part of your identity. What you feel yourself to be, is also a reminder of personal responsibility. It underscores that your inner state matters far more than external circumstances. By consciously choosing the feelings you cultivate about yourself, you shape not only your perception of life but the actual unfolding of experiences. In essence, Neville's teaching points to a profound truth. Identity is creative. The emotional self-image we hold quietly orchestrates our thoughts, actions, and opportunities. When we align our feelings with the reality we wish to live, we begin to embody it, and in doing so, we invite the outer world to match our inner state. Chapter 10. Your imagination is God. One of the most striking and often misunderstood statements of Neville Goddard is, "Your imagination is God." At first, this phrase can seem controversial or even shocking. Neville was not referring to a distant deity in the sky or an external, separate force. Instead, he used the word God to describe the creative power inherent in human consciousness, the same power that shapes reality through imagination, feeling, and belief. According to Neville, imagination is the divine force that operates through each person. It is not limited to artistic or intellectual creativity. It is the source of all change and manifestation. Everything that exists externally was first conceived within the imagination, and every life circumstance is ultimately a reflection of inner assumptions and feelings. This teaching reframes spirituality in a profoundly practical way. When Neville said, "Your imagination is God," he was pointing to the responsibility and power each individual carries. By recognizing imagination as divine, he emphasized that we are creators of our own experience. Our inner world matters deeply, because it is the source from which all outer events arise. For example, consider someone who desires health, success, or happiness. Neville would suggest that their imagination, the vivid, emotional sense of already having the desired outcome, is the active power that will eventually bring it into manifestation. The external world does not create these experiences. Rather, it mirrors the inner reality that has been imagined, believed, and felt as true. Understanding this principle also shifts the focus from struggle to alignment. If imagination is God, then creation is not about forcing outcomes or battling circumstances. It is about aligning inner states with the reality you wish to experience. The practice involves imagining, feeling, and assuming your desired life as already real, thereby activating the creative power within. Neville's teaching invites a new level of personal responsibility. Recognizing that imagination is God means realizing that your thoughts, assumptions, and feelings are powerful and consequential. The quality of your inner life directly shapes your experience of the outer world. It also offers a profound sense of empowerment. Instead of waiting for external forces to provide change, you can consciously direct your imagination. By choosing what to feel, what to believe, and what to imagine, you participate directly in the creative process of life. In essence, your imagination is God encapsulates Neville's entire philosophy. The creative power we seek externally has always existed within us. By acknowledging and harnessing this inner divinity, we gain the ability to shape reality in ways previously thought impossible. This teaching challenges us to see our imagination not as a trivial pastime, but as a sacred, divine tool. It reminds us that the life we experience begins in our mind, and the true power to transform it lies within our own consciousness. Conclusion: the inner world shapes the outer world. The teachings of Neville Goddard revolve around a simple yet profound idea. Our inner world of imagination, belief, and feeling shapes the outer world of experience. Throughout his work, Neville emphasized that the circumstances we encounter, not random or purely dictated by external forces. Instead, they reflect the assumptions we hold about ourselves, life, and what is possible. By paying attention to these inner states, our feelings, thoughts, and repeated imaginations, we can begin to understand how deeply they influence the reality we experience. The quotes explored in this audiobook illustrate practical ways to apply this understanding. Imagination is creative. It is the starting point of all experiences. Feeling is the secret. Emotion is the power that brings thoughts into reality. Persisting in assumptions and daring to believe shapes circumstances. Changing the conception of self transforms both identity and opportunity. Living in the end aligns the inner state with the desired outcome. Neville encouraged experimentation rather than blind acceptance. He urged people to try these methods, observe the results, and notice how subtle shifts in feeling and imagination affect life over time. The process requires patience, consistency, and emotional engagement, but the potential for transformation is profound. When we consciously imagine outcomes, feel them as real, and persist in these assumptions, we begin to notice subtle shifts, new opportunities, new perspectives, and experiences that align with the reality we have been cultivating within. Over time, these inner practices manifest outwardly, revealing the power of the mind in action. Whether approached as psychology, spirituality, or philosophy, Neville's teachings offer an empowering truth. The story we tell ourselves about who we are and what is possible has the power to shape the life we live. And that story begins in the imagination, the sacred, creative force within each of us. Ultimately, the journey is one of self-realization. By understanding and harnessing the principles behind Neville's quotes, we come to recognize that the power to change our experience has always been within us. The inner world is not separate from the outer. It is the blueprint from which reality unfolds. Your imagination, your feelings, and your assumptions are the tools. How you use them will determine the life you experience.